Hi, I am Omar Kafagi, and this is the C-Suite at the Open Video series with TMX Group. Joining me today is Mike Crawley, the CEO of Northland Power. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
It's nice to be here.
So, Mike, can you tell us a little bit more about Northland Power and what you do?
For sure. So Northland's been around for about 30 years. We were one of the early private power companies in Canada, and we started building some of the first private power projects in Canada back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And what has defined Northland over that 30-year period is always being able to pivot to be part of what is the next wave of growth in the electricity sector. And there's been some tremendous growth over the last 30 years. Northland has grown from being a couple of small power plants in Northern Ontario to now having more than 2.5 gigawatts of power generation all around the world, with offices all around the world as well, supporting both our operations and our development.
So, Mike, how is your business impacted by COVID-19 and how are you able to adapt?
Good question. So first and foremost, our plants are all considered to be essential infrastructure, which means that we had to make sure that they could continue running to deliver power to the markets where they're situated, right? So our offshore wind projects, where we've got about 1,000 megawatts or a gigawatt in total in the North Sea, deliver a lot of power into that part of Europe. So we had to make sure that those power plants could continue running. And that meant looking at how we separate crews in the vessels that go out to service those turbines to ensure that we minimize the risk of infections. We implemented temperature controls, travel tracking, and a whole range of health protocols to make sure that, as I said, we minimize the risk of infections and assured ourselves that those plants could continue operating. Similarly, with our Canadian plants, we looked at the control centers where people would be working in close proximity and created 2 separate shifts or crews so that they would never overlap, and that there was a very rigorous and sanitation process between crew changes. And I'm happy to report that we never had any cases so far in any of our operating facilities, and that we're able to continue operating those plants at the same level of availability. And these plants are all under long-term contracts, so the price that they get is set. The challenge for us is to make sure that they continue to operate, and we were able to do that.
That's great. So, Mike, as an investor, why Northland Power? How would you describe it to me as an attractive investment proposition?
So, as I said at the beginning, Northland's always been an early mover into the next wave of growth in the power generation sector. We were an early mover into renewables in Ontario and Quebec, building a portfolio of wind and solar projects. And more recently, we were an early mover into offshore wind, initially in Europe, where we built a 600 megawatt project, then a 300 megawatt project, then another 250 megawatt project over the last 3 years. And these are huge projects situated out in the North Sea. And when you look at the next decade, there is going to be a huge transformation of the power generation sector globally as coal-fired, oil-fired generation is retired and replaced with renewable power. So we see huge opportunities for us to build out a lot more onshore wind, but in particularly a lot of offshore wind as well in markets where we're present, like Taiwan, Japan, Korea, where there isn't really any room to put turbines onshore or to put a lot of solar panels onshore. And the real opportunity to add new generation is offshore. And that's where Northland is one of the few companies, and certainly one of the very few Canadian companies, that have any expertise in doing that.
And finally, you've been listed on the TSX for over 20 years now. How did the listing on the TSX contribute to the success of your business?
Well, power generation is a capital-intensive business. So having access to investors through our TSX listing has been critical to fueling our growth. And we've regularly access the market to raise capital to grow the company and to build new infrastructure, not just in Canada, but now around the world.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Mike. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you very much.